Ever find yourself wondering what really goes down in the back rooms of politics? We see the press conferences, the super polished statements, but what about the real disagreements? The private doubts, maybe even within a party that seems like it's all on the same page.
Yeah, it's like a whole other world back there.
Totally. And today, we're diving right into that world. We're looking at how Republicans are reacting to that U.S. strike in Yemen.
And what's so interesting here is it's like this event kind of exposed these underlying tensions, different ways of thinking within the Republican Party itself, especially when it comes to foreign policy and this one pretty prominent guy.
Exactly. So we're going to do a deep dive on this YouTube video from the Ring of Fire. They break down a really interesting Jewish Insider article. The article talked to 9 Republican senators about Senator J.D. Vance and where he stands on this Yemen strike. Now get this. Most of these senators wanted to stay anonymous. Like they didn't want their names out there.
Which is pretty telling, right?
Yeah.
Makes you think there's some real sensitivity around this whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. So our mission in this deep dive, we want to try to understand these different opinions. What's being said publicly versus privately, see what it could mean for J.D. Vance, and ultimately figure out what this all says about the Republican Party right now. Like, what's the state of things?
Okay, so where do we even start with all this? I mean, this whole J.D. Vance thing kind of blew up, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about Signalgate. Remember all that? This video brings up these private messages, and apparently J.D. Vance had some pretty big reservations about the U.S. getting involved in Yemen. But here's the kicker. Everyone else in these messages seemed to be all for it, like super enthusiastic. The video even mentioned they were saying stuff like, hell yeah, let's go bomb Yemen, that kind of thing.
Wild. So Vance is like the odd man out.
Pretty much. He seemed way more cautious about the whole thing.
Huh, interesting. So why, I mean, what was his reasoning?
Well, apparently he was worried about Trump's messaging. He thought it was inconsistent, especially when it came to Europe and our allies over there. And beyond that, he was just generally hesitant about using American military power like that, in that specific situation.
It's that classic debate, isn't it? Restraint versus force. It's been a constant back and forth in the Republican Party for ages.
Right. It wasn't just like Vance was against the strike just because he had reasons. But some of his fellow Republicans, not so happy about it. At least the ones who talked to Jewish Insider, but wanted to remain anonymous.
Yeah, those anonymous voices really say a lot, about the pressure within the party and what people are afraid of. What's really striking is how much they disapproved.
Mm-hmm.
The video even talks about this idea of Trump having buyer's remorse, like maybe he's regretting endorsing Vance now.
And here's where it gets really juicy. The video straight up asks if maybe Trump's looking back and thinking, what have I done? Like maybe he was considering Vance as a running mate down the road, but now this whole thing with Yemen, that's a major national security issue. Having different opinions on that could be a deal breaker.
And for Vance, the video doesn't paint a pretty picture. It basically says he's screwed no matter what he does.
Wait, hold on. Break that down for me. How is he in a lose-lose situation?
Okay, so imagine Vance comes out and says he disagrees with Trump publicly on something like this. He's going to alienate the Medjay base. Those guys are fiercely loyal to Trump, and they won't take kindly to that.
Yeah, crossing them is risky.
But even if Vance keeps publicly supporting Trump, these private doubts he had, they're out in the open now. And that could hurt him with more traditional Republicans, The ones who think strong national defense is super important, the ones who want America to project its power, especially when we're threatened.
Yeah, it's like a balancing act.
Exactly. And the video even quotes this one senator. Didn't say who it was, but apparently the senator was shocked that Vance didn't see the need to strike back when they struck our naval vessels. Like, it was obvious to him that we needed to retaliate.
Wow, some strong feelings there.
Oh, yeah. And they even compared this view to someone like Lindsey Graham,
Yeah.
Big on retaliation, defending American interests, that whole thing. So we've got all these anonymous senators coming down hard on Vance. But it's important to note that not every Republican felt that way. 2 senators actually went on the record to defend him.
Okay, who are we talking about?
Mark-Wayne Mullen and Tom Tillis.
All right, so what did they say?
Well, Senator Tillis was pretty interesting, kind of blunt, too. He said that Vance is consistent, like he's consistently against using American military power unless the U.S. is directly and immediately threatened.
So Tillis is saying Vance has a clear stance on this kind of thing.
Right. But here's the thing. Tillis makes it super clear he doesn't agree with Vance at all. He even called Vance totally wrong and a piece of crap. But then he circles back and says, this is what Vance truly believes. Like, it's genuine. And he's always held this position.
Okay, so even though he defended Vance being consistent, He's not actually saying he agrees with Vance about this Yemen strike. He's more saying that Vance has an ideology, a framework, even if it's one he totally disagrees with.
Exactly. It's like saying, look, I think this guy's nuts, but at least he's nuts in a consistent way.
Yeah, I get it.
So it makes you think, right, if Trump really is considering Vance as a running mate, this whole public disagreement on such a huge issue, how does that factor in?
Right, good point. Okay, so what does all this mean for the Republican Party overall? Let's zoom out a little and look at the big picture. We're definitely seeing a split here, a disagreement about foreign policy, about when it's right to use the U.S. military and how much power we should project.
Yeah, and this isn't exactly new. This split has been there for a while, but the whole Vance thing kind of brought it to the surface. It's like a spotlight on the different factions within the Republican Party.
Right, I see what you mean.
You got those who lean toward a more isolationist or non-interventionist foreign policy. They're kind of like, let's stay out of it unless it directly affects us. That seems to be where Vance is coming from.
Right.
And then you've got the folks who want the U.S. to be more assertive, more proactive on the world stage. They're like, America needs to be a leader, and sometimes that means using our military might.
So two very different schools of thought. And where does that leave Vance?
Well, the video's analysis is pretty clear. This could have some serious long-term consequences for his political future.
Yeah, it sounds like he's in a tough spot.
Big time. Like we said, he could alienate key parts of the Republican base no matter what he does. If he sticks with his non-interventionist views, he risks losing the Trump loyalists. If he tries to walk it back and appear more hawkish, he could lose the more traditional Republicans who might see him as flip-flopping. It's a tightrope walk for sure.
And this whole Signalgate thing really adds another layer to it, right? These private conversations, suddenly they're public. It's like we're getting a glimpse behind the curtain, seeing what politicians really think, as opposed to what they say publicly.
Yeah, it really raises questions about authenticity, about how much a politician's private beliefs actually line up with what they say in public and what their party stands for.
So much to unpack here.
Totally.
All right, let's try to summarize all this for our listeners.
Yeah.
So we've got these internal divisions within the Republican Party when it comes to foreign policy. This whole thing was sparked by J.D. Vance and his private reservations about the U.S. strike in Yemen.
And those reservations came to light because of the Signalgate leaks, which, by the way, is a whole other can of worms.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But anyway, those private thoughts, they got some pretty harsh criticism from anonymous Republican senators, some even suggesting that Trump might be having second thoughts about endorsing Vance in the first place.
Buyer's remorse, they called it.
Right. And even though people like Tom Tillis came out and said, hey, Vance is at least consistent in his beliefs, they also made it super clear that they totally disagree with those beliefs.
To put it mildly.
Yeah. So now Vance is in this tricky situation where he could alienate both the Trump loyalists and the more traditional Republicans. Tough spot to be in.
No doubt. And if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, it really highlights this ongoing struggle within the Republican Party about America's role in the world. It's like this fundamental question. Are we the world's police, or do we focus on our own backyard?
And it makes you think about how much freedom politicians really have to disagree, even privately, with what their party supposedly stands for.
Right.
Without facing some serious blowback.
It's like, is it okay to have your own thoughts, or do you have to be 100% on message all the time?
So here's a final thought for everyone listening to really chew on. Given all this infighting, all this loyalty within political parties, how much should we care about what a politician personally believes versus how much they support their party leader? Like, think about it. Political alliances are complicated. There can be a real cost to speaking your mind, even in private. But maybe, just maybe, there can be some unexpected benefits too. This whole thing with Vance is just one example of how these internal dynamics are constantly shifting, constantly evolving. And honestly, it'll be fascinating to see how it all plays out, both within the Republican Party and in the broader political landscape. Who knows what's going to happen next?
Yeah, that's the thing about politics. It's always a surprise.
Always keeps you guessing.
You got that right.